How many times do people wake up and shit all over themselves? I should have eaten better yesterday. I should have gotten up earlier and worked out. What have they done? Immediately, the second they speak to them, they put themselves in the shame frequency. And again, once shame exists, opportunity and growth go out the window. Who do you think you are? Who do you think you are to live so big? Who do you think you are to start a company to broadcast your authority and bring other people into this world? Like, who do you think you are? Who wants to listen to you? Oftentimes, there's little nuances. Sometimes it's just, oh man, your sibling got taken out more often to do things solo with your parents than you did, which just made you believe this. It wasn't anything that was done to you. But again, these are the nuances of what really keeps people stuck and stepping out into their real power and potential and using their voice authentically in this world. Shame is vicious.
Hey everyone, it's Tamara Thompson from Broadcast Your Authority, and I'm super excited for our next guest, Brian Bogert. He literally is a keynote speaker, transformational coach, and has an incredible story. At age 7, Brian survived a traumatic injury that severed his left arm, leading to years of rehabilitation and over 24 surgeries. This experience gave him a deep understanding of physical, emotional, and mental pain. He's also a business strategist who revolutionizes how organizations and entrepreneurs connect with their authentic selves to achieve wealth. And, I had a great call with him. It was interesting because we were connected to Steve Sims, who introduced us. And I said, I need to know this guy. I looked him up, read his story, and then we connected and we had a phone call. And welcome to the show, Brian. I'm so grateful to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. I was happy I saw Steve sitting in the studio on social and that we've been connected. And since then, I think it's just taken off. You've made a few introductions for me. And again, having Justin in the studio the same day, it's just amazing how small this world becomes. And it's awesome when you see good people pulling in the same direction.
And I think that's one of the biggest things is like building those relationships and those strong connections with people. And then once you start doing that with the right people in the right space, your communities start to grow exponentially. And then you really start to see who your tribe is, like who your power partners are, who's supportive of you, that allow you to make the introductions like that. And so I was just very grateful for that introduction. And it's a pleasure to have you here.
Likewise, I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. I mean, you've got a crazy story on that side. And like your personal story, of overcoming a traumatic injury at such a young age. How did this experience really shape your approach into what you do now with helping others, like in embracing, to avoid suffering?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. One of the things that I have to start with and acknowledge is that when I came out of the hospital at first, I had a teddy bear in between my arm because I needed to allow my arm to heal at 90 degrees. And so immediately, because I've always had a big energy, and of course, when there's a cute little kid with a sling, people come up and ask. And they would inevitably ask me, Brian, what happened to you? And I would always look them deadpan in the eye and say, I was run over by a truck and my left arm was torn off. Now, back then, I couldn't pull my sleeve up because I was in a sling, but 99% of people would do the following two things. They would pause and they'd turn to my parents for validation, which told me what? They didn't believe me. They didn't believe my own truth that I'm living and existing in. And then the same people would view me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my situation, immediately limiting me. And so the reason I acknowledge that is because I know what it's like to be the only one in every single room. So though I don't know what it's like to be a person of color or someone who's transgender or name any other category of life, I also identify with these people, at least in the emotions that we experience as it relates to being the only one in almost every room we walk into. Now, where this concept came from, I was in a fog. My parents were not, right? Those first 5 years after the injury, they were very aware of the unceasing medical treatments, years of physical therapy. And the idea of seeing their son grow up without the use of his left arm was a source of great potential suffering for them. So they willed themselves day in and day out to do what was necessary, do what was tough, to ultimately embrace the pains required to strengthen and heal me. So though I didn't realize it at the time, and whether it was intentional or not, that what they did was they ingrained in me this philosophy and way of living, which is ultimately to embrace pain to avoid suffering. Now, the last piece to that is when we do this effectively in all areas of life, we also gain freedom. So what does the concept mean? Because I think it's important to explain it a little bit, right? We have to understand pain. Pain's defined as short-term, intermittent, a direct cause from something, and alleviated once that direct cause is removed. Then what do we do as human beings? We throw adjectives in front of it and screw up the definition, like acute and chronic, right? Now, acute maintains it, but chronic does not, because it implies, right, that it exists after the direct cause is removed, and it's not short-term. So let's stop calling that chronic pain and call it what it really is, suffering. Now, we don't want to admit that suffering exists, particularly when it's a direct result of our choices. But the unavoidable precursor to change is acceptance. So until we accept the current state of things, we cannot alter them. So what does this concept look like? We can embrace the pain of hitting the gym for 30 minutes a day to avoid the suffering of aches and pains of a sedentary lifestyle. Mm-hmm. We can embrace the pain of a difficult conversation with a loved one or spouse to avoid the suffering of being stuck in a loveless marriage when we really want out or something otherwise. We can embrace the pain of the fit our kids are sure to throw by having them put down their mobile devices at the dinner table to avoid the suffering of years of lost meaningful connection and conversation that we're never going to get back. As business owners, we can embrace the pain of firing our top salesperson who's contributing the most to top line growth to avoid the suffering of stagnation and losing all our other top talent because they're the greatest cancer in the culture, right? And what I learned and what it now applies to a full circle element to what we teach is that ultimately I had to learn how to embrace the pains of going inward and identifying and removing the trash from my past that was continuing to show up as my biggest problems in business and life, and ultimately either transforming that into treasure, right? Or ultimately allowing myself to be free of it to avoid the suffering of years of shame, anger, control, and a whole bunch of byproduct of a whole other emotions that were connected to this story and all the ramifications of it.
Amazing.
Amazing. We're like in awe. We're like,
yeah, it is amazing. Like, what was the path though to get there? I mean, you know, you're clearly whole in the way you've approached this and healed from it, both, you know, physically and emotionally, right? But it isn't just add water and stir. Mm-mm. So how did How long? So how did you get there?
So there's layers to all stories, as I'm sure you know, right? But the beginning part was after I got those two reactions from most people. I heard that if I had a good mindset, if I was mentally tough, then I could do anything. And by the way, I still believe that mental toughness and mindset is a critical component of the story, but it's not the only one, right? But here's what mine looked like. Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything himself, right? I set my mind to anything. And what I really did for the next 13 to 15 years was try to prove to the world, really prove to myself, though I didn't know it at the time, that nothing was going to ultimately stop me. And so I got really good in conditioning myself to set my mind to something and allow myself to understand putting all of my energy channeled into something, what I could manifest into the world or what I could overcome despite whatever limitations or perceived limitations were placed upon me. And that served me really well until it didn't. At 20, I went down on a snowboarding injury. I re-broke my left arm in a compound fracture. I almost lost it again and ended up going 10 months with it hanging by my side, went through 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me because of medical malpractice and 15 different alternative treatments that I knew wouldn't work because the physiology of my arm is not the same, right? 10 months with a bone disconnected, moving around in my arm with the risk of it clipping a nerve or a vein at any moment. But here's what happened in that 10 months. I got into the deepest, darkest, most depressed and disconnected state that I've ever been in my life. And I was angry and resentful in the beginning because I'd been surrounded by people that I'd done things for and shown up for, and nobody was there. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But then I had to surrender to the reality of the fact that the world just bought into the power of my own narrative. See, and they added a 5th one to mine, which I wasn't aware of at the time, which was, and if Brian needs help, he'll ask for it. I didn't know how to do that. So that shifted me down a different path for a little while around vulnerability and authenticity, which I believed was the glue that bound human connection. And it served me really, really well. But I chased what? Because that's all the world taught me. And I still was in seek of who, what house, what car, what amount of money. And by age 27, I had a $10 million business and all of those components in my life. But guess what? My bank account was full and I was empty. I had all the what's I ever wanted, but it cost me who I was. And that was the moment that I started to realize shame was taking over in ways that I didn't understand. I'll compress these next 2 components because they are important to answer your question fully. It was 5 more years before I realized the most profound breakthrough. I was on the couch with my daughter. She wraps her arm around my neck, kisses me on the cheek, says, "I love you, Dada." And I broke down into tears. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting here experiencing joy in a way that I never had identified with, and an emotion that was so vibrant that everything else was pale in comparison. And I'm asking myself, what is going on right now? It made me realize how much I was unconsciously suppressing everything. And it ultimately led to, when I shut off physical pain because it exceeded my ability to cope, I shut off mental pain, spiritual pain, and emotional pain for 20 to 25 years and didn't realize it. Mm-hmm. See, here's the thing. Human connection without emotion isn't really human connection. So even that prior period, I was only getting a little bit of the way there. And so there's layers to all of this. But it was 3 years after that that I believed everything was going to be working out for my favor. I was in the process of executing my buy, sell in my business to do what I'm doing today full time. And 10 months after I did that, I sit on the couch with my wife in our backyard, and she goes on to tell me that things I'd done, ways I'd shown up, had caused a pattern that caused her to lose who she was. Went from being in the best place in my life, best place in my marriage that I ever thought I would be, to not knowing if I'm going to be married for another 30 days. And realizing that the ramifications of all of these areas that I'd been shut off and protecting myself for years unconsciously were actually going to disconnect me from who I was and what I wanted most in my wife and my kids. And so that was the time that I really had to go inward at the deepest level. And that's where a lot of our philosophies were developed from as it relates to waste to wealth. But there's layers, and there's more than what I just hit on, but that's the tops of the waves. And it was ultimately a process of allowing myself to explore the different facets of self that didn't heal till years after my physical body did.
Can you share like a specific example of your philosophy of turning waste into wealth, like how it's transformed somebody's life or business, the people that you've worked with?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've got a number of examples, but one of my favorite ones to tell is a woman that has been unbelievable creative for the last decade. She has built a really niche focus for herself in an industry, and I keep it a little vague just because I want to protect her privacy a little bit. Right. But it's a very niche industry, and she has become a master at what she does. Now, she's undervalued herself for years, but she has extensive relationships with the suppliers and the vendors on all sides of this, and makes introductions that produce multiple 7 and 8 figures regularly for them. She's amassed quite the following across her channels. She has multiple of her social media channels with real organic followers and well in excess of 1 million. That's just been a byproduct of 10 years of consistency. And she averages 5 to 7 million views per week.
That's amazing.
Okay. But she also had never generated over 50 grand in her business in a single year for the entire time she was doing it. Because she completely undervalued her worth. And so the first month in our mastermind, she comes in and gets in the hot seat in the very first session. We unpacked very quickly that her deepest trigger, her deepest shame, was actually tied directly to her creative profession from a moment that took place, actually multiple moments that took place that we unpacked over the course of the following year, all within a period of time in her life that made her believe that she was never going to be good enough. But here's what happened. 6 months later, she tripled her rates on what she was charging for her normal fees, and was then charging for travel and accommodation separately, where she used to include it, way undervaluing and underfeeing herself. She has put together multiple influencer contracts that she's been able to monetize because of the volume and traffic that she drives that were multiple 6 figures. And she's been able to bring them together into a place where she's now hosting events, bringing the suppliers, vendors, and everyone together and putting overlap agreements in so that when they do business together, she gets a percentage of the revenue, right? So in a matter of a year, she 6x'd her income just in the basic things. And she's well on track to do well in excess of 7 figures in this next year, just with some small shifts. And oh, by the way, she's also repaired the relationships with her family, with her sisters, with her husband. She's actually allowing herself to be seen. She's completely transformed externally as she's allowed that conviction to take place inside. And here's the thing. The trash from our past is never our fault, right? But it does become your responsibility once you become aware of it or you start burying others in yours. So we have to remove the shame and blame from it, because if we don't, growth and opportunity go out the window. So that was really where we had to get her to, is to recognize all of what she had and the value that existed. But oh, by the way, oftentimes our treasure is formed in those same moments, and they're just continually conditioned through all that trash pressure. So if we dig deep enough, we identify and remove it, and we allow what no longer serves us to leave, then our treasure can shine and we can stand on the abundant side of life versus being closed off for the rest of it.
Absolutely love that. I wanted to kind of double click on what you mentioned about the levels of connection and that like moment with your daughter, for example, because I know like I've personally gone through dark nights of the soul, right? Where you have all the money, all the everything, and then you're just miserable and hollow. But I think there's so many people that, and I know entrepreneurs that I can think of, right? And that are, it doesn't have to go that dark or that hard, or there's this huge amount of suffering to have this awakening or start healing, right? There's this kind of, like you said, nuanced kind of levels of connection. And so I wanted to ask a little bit about some of your concepts and what that looks like. Because I know there's people out there that it's like, they could connect deeper with family, with their business, with their relationship with money, with all these different things, but there's no traumatic event that's happening that's like forcing them. And you can catch it before it gets there. So yeah.
Well, I mean, I think this is to the core of everything I teach. It gets down to the human experience and the things that we desire most and want to connect with, right? And so I'll give a quick example of something and how it would show up for me when I would talk about how this would take place in my wife. My wife would say something as simple as this: "Hey, honey, what do you want to do with the kids this weekend?" But my shame and my anger filter would cause me to hear it this way: hey, honey, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father here recently. So what do you do to make up for it this weekend? To which point my cells react at a visceral level and I all of a sudden feel the wave of heat and my chest puffs. And what do? I rattle off the 10 things I've done in the last few days to show her I'm a good husband and father. Wasn't even what she asked.
Yeah.
Right. And that was one of the big moments that really started to shift things for me in understanding this concept of connection, because so often, right, our intent cannot be captured if our actions don't communicate congruently. And we are often unconscious to how our actions are communicating because, oh, by the way, 7% of our communication is in the words that we use. 38% is in the tone, the delivery, and the cadence, and 55% is in the nonverbals. So I could be saying exactly what I intend, but if everything else isn't aligned, that doesn't matter, right? And so what do we all seek and desire the most, right? I believe that in our human experience, we all want 4 things. We all want to feel safe. We all want to feel protected. We all want to feel seen and understood, and we all want to feel connected, right? But what happens when we don't feel seen and understood or connected, or we walk into an environment where we don't feel safe and protected? It could be a networking event where everybody's handing out business cards and wants something from you instead of for you. It could be going back to your family's house for the holidays, and your aunt, your dad, and your grandma are all going to look at you a certain way, and weeks ahead of time, you start like agonizing over it, right? All of that is armor. Okay, so if you know what a 35-gallon black trash bag looks like for those outdoor bins, imagine unfolding one flat, right? Grab onto each corner and lift it up in front of your face. This is your armor. My question now becomes, how could you properly expect your wife, your kids, your business partners, your clients, anybody you desire to have a real relationship with to see who you are, what you're willing to do, what you're not willing to do, your heart, your soul, your intent, your desires, your boundaries, your value, your worth, delivered through an opaque force field? And that's assuming that they're not carrying their own, that's going to further dilute the message. And so one of the things that we teach is this concept of what we call the protector and connector, which requires us to get to a strong spine and a soft front. Because I believe that we all have the ability to walk into any environment. And if we ourselves are not guarded and protected, we can wrap a layer of protection around the environment to ensure that everyone in it gets all 4 things they want. Right? But what does that require? A strong spine is I know who I am, what I'm willing to do, what I'm not willing to do, my heart, my intent, my soul, my desires, my boundaries, my areas of pain, the areas I suffer, that I struggle, so that I can be unwavering in any environment. It's kind of like Eminem at the end of the 8 Mile movie when he drops the mic after he's like, yeah, I did do this and I did do that and I did grow up on the side of the tracks. And then all of a sudden his opponent has nothing on him. If you have nothing to defend, protect, justify, then
That's it.
why do you need armor? So then it allows you to drop your armor. And I like to think of my wife and kids in this situation, because if they want to come to dad for love, light, leadership, love, anything, do they want to lay their head down on a metal chest piece of armor? No. And so for me, it's always about the heart and what the heart communicates. But if our heart is guarded, right, the second we protect ourselves, we guarantee we're going to disconnect ourselves from the 2 things we want most: to be seen and understood and connected to the deepest level. And the other thing that we guarantee is the second we protect ourselves, we guarantee we will disconnect ourselves from who we are and what we want. And so often it's about actually understanding that what our cells are reacting to has nothing to do with what's right in front of us. It's cellular memory that's conditioned in multiple moments that your beliefs were formed in, that your life is only further validated because you can't escape that cellular reaction. So we have to really understand these, and we do things like trigger mapping and other things to help people really break this down into moments so that they can recapture truth real time.
I'm just so just taking it all in.
And I'm gonna make sure my husband watches this one too. It'll help our communication. I also think it's like we live in such a day and age that we can communicate with anyone very easily over Zoom. We all found much more often during COVID, but I feel like we're not connecting with each other. Like I connected more so with my family 20 years ago before technology. What can we do to improve the way we do communicate and connect with one another?
I'm a big believer that true strength actually hides behind vulnerability.
Yeah.
Right. And how do we communicate and connect at a deeper level? We have to live and exist in a way that we aren't guarded and protected in the way that we communicate. Right. Like we feel and communicate via energy more than anything else. Right. It's again, that 38 and that 55%. It's not the words that we use. And so we know or innately when someone is holding back, they're retreating inward, they're guarded, they've got ego, right? There's an element of control or perfectionism. And we have the ability, I think, to diffuse that by what we can show by example. We ourselves have to be okay showing up in every environment unprotected though, right? And that's where true freedom lies. That's where abundance lies. That's also what allows us to attract money and relationships and have a gravity to our sense. And so it starts always with us. And so what do I believe can happen, right? If we are not finding a way to connect, then eliminate whatever your agenda is for the purpose of that meeting and have a conversation with the person, right? I was getting ready to interview somebody for my podcast a few weeks ago. I read people really well. he got on, and I've met him one other time before, but I knew he was not on. Now, could he have performed that day? No doubt. Because he's like me and so many other high performers that learn to receive love, validation, and connection through performance. So it's always contingent upon what we did. So when it's time to go, we snap our fingers and we're on, right? We can. I knew he could, but the human side of me was more concerned about what was actually happening. So my agenda, had I stayed attached to it, was to drive forward and get this podcast interview done. And instead I said, bro, let's get off of Riverside. Let's go jump into a different room and let's just spend an hour talking and let me see if I can help you. Right? Like, it's this concept of really wanting to make sure that we're caring for people, not just wanting from them. And when we open ourselves to that, we give ourselves that same respect. But it's about how do we create those spaces? And what are the ways that we're communicating and using our truths to give others permission to live theirs? See, when you look at how we're disconnected, I believe we suffer in 4 areas. We suffer for the things that are left unsaid, the things that we lack permission to feel or say, the things that we lack the words to articulate or understand, or the things that are left undone. Often what keeps people disconnected, especially in professional environments, or, man, this is a business meeting, is it's all corporate armor bullshit that just keeps people in these boxes instead of actually allowing their natural frequency and vibration to exist. And so I believe my reason for existence is to allow my truth to give others permission to live theirs. But every time I speak mine, I talk about my shame, I talk about my anger, I talk about financial loss, I talk about the components that these things ultimately created in my life, despite my ability to perform and fill my bank account really well. Right? Not only do I free myself from the shackles of my own shame, but I give people permission to feel and say something they wouldn't have otherwise, and words to articulate and understand it. And so at the end of the day, we're so guarded and protected because we live in a toxic shame-based society that it doesn't matter what category you fit in, what area you turn, you're wrong for something, right? And you're constantly pointed out why you're wrong, why you're not good enough, why you should be doing something different. And should is also in and of itself a shame-based word.
Yeah.
It implies who you are and what you're doing isn't good enough.
Yeah.
And so I think oftentimes we just need to bring it back down to the basic levels of communication and not overcomplicate things, because every time we open through vulnerability, we give people permission to feel and say things and words to articulate and understand them so they don't have to feel so guarded. They can act and do in the moment with you.
Yeah.
What are the most common emotional barriers you've seen with the high performing individuals? What do you see the most common?
Hands down, shame is the most prevalent,
Yeah.
right? Now, and here's the thing. Shame is the ultimate wolf in sheep's clothing because it shows up as about 50 other emotions, right? It presents as fear, anger, control, perfectionism, guilt, like scarcity, you name it, the list goes on. Okay. And so, and a lot of these things, like anger, for example, is a secondary emotion. It's not a primary emotion. It's there designed simply to protect you, to get a big energy and push everything and everyone away from you, right? But shame is the underlying piece. And here's the challenge with that. If we understand the human frequency scale, which David Hawkins mapped out, it goes from 0 to 700.
Amazing.
Shame is the lowest registerable frequency that exists. It's at 20. 90% of the world are stuck between 100 and 150, which is anger and fear. Courage is 400. Self-actualization is 700. Right? So, like, think about the byproducts of even just the way we communicate with ourselves. How many times do people wake up and shit all over themselves? I should have eaten better yesterday. I should have gotten up earlier and worked out. What have they done? Immediately, the second they speak to them, they put themselves in the shame frequency. And again, once shame exists, opportunity and growth go out the window. It's done. You can't exist. But shame also has 2 talk tracks. Okay? And I got this from Brene Brown. This was what helped me understand one component of my shame, because I always thought it was just the first. The first is I'm not worthy and I'm not good enough. Now, I would be lying if I told you I didn't have moments that I lived there, but that's not my predominant narrative. I've not struggled for confidence in my abilities in life, right? But where did I struggle? The other one is when you shut that down, you show up in the arena and you're ready to go to battle. It's, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are to live so big? Who do you think you are to start a company to broadcast your authority and bring other people into this world? Like, who do you think you are? Who wants to listen to you? Right? And so here's the thing. I did a lot of epic major things, but all the things I did, the bigger I lived, the bigger I performed, the more I felt the need to apologize for myself.
Interesting.
Right? I used to believe that love language was my words of affirmation. But every time I would receive a compliment or love language or words, I would feel shittier about myself. Right? And this is a common pattern for so many people. How many people refuse compliments? Oh, no, I'm not that great. It's like, instead, just fully receive it. Right? But shame is so toxic and it's so blind. And going back to a question that you asked earlier, here's the reality. Shame doesn't require trauma to exist. Right? Now, the other side of it is trauma can be a big T or a little t trauma. And what do I mean by little t trauma? You could have embedded belief systems because of how your dad screamed at you when you loaded the dishwasher incorrectly when you were 8 that has given you this belief that you're never going to be able to do anything right, right? Like sometimes it's as subtle and nuanced as that keeps people stuck for decades, right? All the way up to people who deal with big elements of this or alcoholism and abuse in their family that creates all this codependency. But again, what we're conditioned to believe and how we operate in the world is typically formed in our first 7 to 14 years of life.
Yeah.
And so though most people will say, man, I had a great upbringing, I had great parents. Okay, let's dig deeper, because oftentimes there's little nuances. Sometimes it's just, oh man, your sibling got taken out more often to do things solo with your parents than you did, which just made you believe this. It wasn't anything that was done to you. But again, these are the nuances of what really keeps people stuck and stepping out into their real power and potential and using their voice authentically in this world. Shame is vicious.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I could just
That's
go
amazing.
deep on this all day. I know that people work with you in different capacities. From one, your mastermind, you have an awesome podcast out too. What else are you have going on that you're passionate about right now? Could you share a little bit more with our audience?
Absolutely. So we are on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as we possibly can by reducing the level of suffering that exists. So why do I say that? Because I believe that moved people move people. And my goal at this moment is just to move as many as I can, because it's not going to be Brian Bogert's name behind that impact. But what are we doing beyond that? I believe that anytime I have a chance to get in front of people, it's a chance for impact. So I speak in front of large rooms. I speak and do corporate consulting. And I love the corporate side because that's where my background is. But I also love entrepreneurs because of their creativity, their vision, their compassion, their ability to solve problems. And so there's solutions that exist there as well. So I've got speaking and coaching, but I do one-to-one stuff. We do masterminds. We do low-level communities that give people access to the help they need for zero or very low barrier of entry. So we have a coaching community that we do rapid-fire coaching 3 times a month on Zoom. I typically get through 8 to 10 people within an hour, and it's $88 a month, and the value stack is exponential because that's the way that we can serve. So there's podcasts, there's media, there's a whole variety of things. We run challenges. We've got apps. At the end of the day, I don't know what I don't know, but what I do know is that I really want to help as many people as I can. And so if there's anything that resonates with you from today, any way that you felt something inside of you get sparked by the conversations, the examples, or the stories, and you think there's any chance for growth or opportunity, reach out and we'll help you find the path, because it's not the same for everyone.
Amazing.
I love that.
Yeah.
Where can they find it? Is it brianbogert.com?
BrianBogert.com if you're online. If you're social media, it's at Bogert Brian on all channels.
All channels. Follow his Instagram. I love connecting around Instagram. So, well, we appreciate you so much for traveling out here today and being on the show. I'm super grateful for the opportunity to connect with you. Yeah. And those that are watching, be sure to follow Brian everywhere. He's an incredible human being, and I'm excited to check out his podcast even more myself, because I've seen some incredible interviews that you've hosted. So those of you checking out the show today, be sure to subscribe, ring that bell, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and we will see you in the next episode.